Lesson 3: The 4 Existential Concerns.
Healing religious trauma and embarking on a journey of discovery can be terrifying. Many assumptions about the dangers of setting out on our own exist, but we all have real fears. For simplicity's sake, let's just call them existential concerns.
There are some things we should be concerned about. If we conduct our lives without apprehension, we may find ourselves at the mercy of the more dangerous aspects of our world. Conversely, if we exaggerate those concerns, we may find ourselves immobilized and unable to function, which also makes us vulnerable to high control religion and manipulative people who promise to keep us safe as they take advantage of our fears.
When we enter a new territory, like trying to heal from trauma or discovering new things, we will inevitably face these existential concerns. Since religion and our families of origin are usually unequipped to deal with these concerns, they opt for easy, manufactured answers that cause us to bypass the real issues and adopt solutions that help us survive instead of moving forward. We wait for someone or someone else to rescue us from life's difficulties instead of exploring the questions more thoroughly.
Bypassing or ignoring big questions doesn't make them smaller or resolve them for us. So it does really feel like it is a battle of extremes. So, how, in your opinion, do we find a balance, find a healthy balance?
Yeah, just to summarize, so if we are without apprehension, without fear, without concern for what's going on in the world,
Mhm.
then we will find ourselves at the mercy of things.
Mhm.
It's gonna hurt when we do that, right?
Yeah.
So, but if we exaggerate those concerns, then we have a different problem. People will take advantage of us. Religions, high control
Mhm.
families, more aggressive people will take advantage of us because we're so afraid and
Right.
because we're afraid of everything. So you're right. There has to be a balance somewhere in there, and I think we expressed it in this uh, little paragraph. If we will investigate those questions more thoroughly,
Mhm.
then we'll understand what it is we're afraid of and what's the right amount of fear,
Mhm.
what's the right amount of whatever the fears are that we'll discuss a little later.
Mhm.
And then we can navigate life a lot better. But ignoring the questions is not solving the problem, right?
Mhm.
It's understanding the questions.
Right. Maybe
that-
giving us the opportunity to critically think about those questions.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And that's what we hope to do in this chapter. So pay attention on to number 1.
Number 1, fear of death.
In the 1970s, Ernest Becker won the Pulitzer Prize for his book, Denial of Death. In this work, he postulated that non-human animals know nothing about dying by stating this: the knowledge of death is reflective and conceptual, and animals are spared. Others, such as psychologist James Anderson of Scotland, now assert, I believe we are now justified in thinking that chimpanzees have some kind of awareness of death. But until animals grow a more developed cortex or they learn to speak, we may have to just assume that they are concerned with more fundamental things like food and the inherent dangers.
Even though we are unsure whether our other animals have this concern, we know that humans do. The only reason the fear of death is below the fear of public speaking is because most phobias and fears are connected to the fear of dying. So much so that we subdivide it into multiple categories.
Most of us generally focus on the minor concerns and treat them like they were life and death. This gives us the false assumption that we control our environment and make our world safer. In some ways, this makes sense and it's a practical approach to life, but we still haven't addressed fear and its more significant issues.
We join religious groups because they promise the antidote to death. Once we accept their creeds and promises, it becomes very uncomfortable to question the obvious flaws and inconsistencies in their suppositions. At least they keep us entertained and distract so we don't think about existential questions too often.
We are forevermore searching for the latest snake oil that the salesman promises will answer all of our concerns about our health and well being, only to replace it with something else the following year. If possible, we hope to avoid hard work, like dealing with mental and physical health, while we continue our search for a magic elixir.
Since leaving organized religion, one of the biggest revelations for me was to accept the fact that I would die, and I did not know what would happen after that. Obsessions with the afterlife and theories of what happens next sometimes cause me to avoid living the life that was before me. The one day it will all be better mantra is another form of bypassing that causes me to miss experiences of genuine existence.
In the movie Big Fish, Albert Finney's character can live carefree because he believes in his own stories, one of which is about a witch telling him how he would die. He thought that he didn't have to worry because, as he said, this is not the way I'm going to die. His son helped him untangle reality from his big fish stories, and in the end, they grew closer. I love the movie every time I watch it, but in the end, it's just a tale about the stories we tell each other.
We don't know when we'll die or how, but we can live better by learning and growing. We can decide to live authentically instead of in service to our fears.
To live authentically, we must answer the question, who am I? To do this, we must dissociate with all of our other identities that life has assigned to us. We may very well be a Baptist, a Methodist, an American, or a plumber, but those are just labels and groups that we have associated with. They are not who we are.
The I am statements are compelling. Jesus and Yahweh said, I am, in a very declarative and universal way. But attaching things like plumber and Baptist to I am is inauthentic because not all plumbers and Baptists are the same. And those are not our core identities. They are only the things we do.
We must remember our true and authentic selves. When we dissociate all our labels and false identities, we can live more authentically in the present. We are then able to accept realities like death without needing to manipulate it. We make better decisions about everything by being with reality rather than creating a fish story to tell us how we are going to die and where we are going to go.
Knowing who we are makes it easier to be where we are. Going into this discussion, death is definitely a focus of ours as human beings. And honestly, I would say I was absolutely more focused in a negative or fearful way inside of religion than I am now that I am outside of organized religion.
Yeah. The fear is part of the marketing plan for most religions. And also salesmen that try to sell you life insurance and all those things. It's something that, a lot of us have come to the realization that there's two things we don't know for sure. And that's what God is actually like, and if there is a God, and also what the afterlife looks like.
Or if there is an afterlife.
Yeah, and every religion has a concept of that. But when we start to live in fear about that, or fear of anything that gets excessive, because fear can motivate us. Fear can be something that alerts us to danger, right?
Sure, right.
And if we don't have that, as we mentioned before, then that might be a cause for concern, because we're probably going to hurt ourselves or get into trouble or something like that. So living without fear is really not the answer. But also this obsession with the things we don't know about, and that fear can also paralyze us. And then people take advantage of us, right? And people use us, for their propaganda and things like that. So
Yeah. And to be fair, like that is how our brains are wired, is to make sense and find answers and find patterns and things like that. But I do think that when we go to the extreme where there's, paralyzing fear, as you said, that's when we need to take a look at, what is really driving us.
mhm.
Mhm.
And are those fears rational?
Mm,
Could I do a little research and
mm,
find out more about them,
right.
or dig a little deeper? Why am I having this fear? Maybe I'll do
Mhm,
some counseling that investigates
mhm,
my fears.
right.
Those are all perfectly great things to do, and those things will help us navigate that existential fear of dying, right?
Absolutely.
How about we go on to number 2?
Let's do it.
All right.
Number 2, fear of freedom.
There's a lot of talk these days about freedom. The reality is that most of these discussions are really about being free from one group as they conform and attach to a new belief system and a new group. These people may be releasing their attachment to the fundamentalists or conservative groups only to be connected to another dogmatic system. In this way, they spend time disproving and condemning the old while celebrating the new.
There are inherent problems with this approach. First, it avoids the necessary work of finding healing, identity, and purpose for us. We never address our personal needs because we assume that attaching to the right group will solve our problems. However, we never improve without focused attention because organizations focus on the group's survival over the individual.
Along with avoiding individual work, we bypass our fear of being free. It's the feeling that we had when we left home, started our first job, or started escaping from toxic religion. It's why in the story of Moses, the Israelites begged to return to captivity. The desert was new, unpredictable, and difficult. Most of us have a cloak of privilege even in our captivity. But when we step into freedom and autonomy, it can make us feel very vulnerable.
We must fully own ourselves, our beliefs, our feelings, and even our suffering. We have to understand that some of these things we caused. There are also things we can't control. When we own up to reality, we can begin to respond to these things instead of reacting.
There very well may be people who help us along the way, but until we escape the responsibility to accept, reject, and change those things, we will never be free. The group is universally not going to take responsibility for us because it is focused on the larger group. In my experience, they rarely get around to the quote unquote least of these.
Most religions claim to free us from whatever they disagree with, but most of that freedom comes from realizing we are personally responsible. It is scary to face freedom from whatever enslaves us, and groups can be helpful if they truly support, encourage, and listen to us. However, groups can also become new prisons requiring regular attendance, money, and volunteer labor. People with an addiction tend to trade one addiction for another, and addiction to religion is one of the main substitutes.
Freedom is scary, but surrendering our freedom to a religious group, a political party, or even a family can be problematic. And not taking responsibility is a decision to let others decide for us.
So, this discussion is really timely because we are recording this when we're in a presidential election year. In fact, we're only at this recording 9 days away from
Mm-hmm.
a presidential election. And so we hear a lot from both parties about freedom. So, we throw that word around a lot. We use it quite a bit in this particular lesson. But what is freedom? And conversely,
Mm-hmm.
what is it not?
Yeah. So I think it helps to kind of analyze um, what's captivity.
Mm,
You know what, if freedom is what we're looking for and that's what we long for, we want to be free.
hmm
What is it that we want to be free from? What are the things that are keeping us captive? And one of the realities of groups, we need connection,
hmm
but in groups for sometimes very quickly become captive. We become captive to groups,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because I got to agree with them, you know,
hmm
I got to pursue the same things. And it can very quickly become a prison and not really freedom, right?
Yeah.
Be free from that, come over here, and then we're captive
Yeah. And
to something
we
else.
have to have, I'm thinking about our religious, institutions that we were a part of. We have to have the same language. We need to, maybe not wear the same, I think about certain cults or whatever where they have to wear the same dress and same hairstyle, but we do kind of conform to a certain way that we look, for men, particularly, and how we speak and the language that we use, the vocabulary that we use. So I do think that we are somehow drawn in to that conformity piece that you're talking about.
Yeah, and so let's just be honest about freedom.
Mm,
Um, it's we all want freedom. We
mhm,
all talk about freedom, but most of us are at least somewhat afraid
mhm,
of freedom.
mhm.
Right.
Of true freedom,
Of
like
true,
what
yeah,
freedom really is,
yeah,
right?
because then I have to make all my own
Mm.
decisions. You know,
I
it's
had to
all on
critically
me.
think.
And what the other reality is, probably once you get out of that control,
Mhm,
you know, and that group think and so on, you got to start
mhm,
thinking for yourself, and
mhm,
you got to start examining your mental health,
mhm.
your well-being, and all that stuff leads to hard work,
Yeah,
and that's scary.
that is
Again, it's
scary. Yep.
scary. So it's a fear of freedom, which sounds like nothing we would ever have, but I
Mhm,
guarantee you, every single one of us
mhm.
struggles in this area.
Yeah, so when we talk about what freedom is, what is freedom not? I'm not sure if I'm asking that the right way, but freedom to me is not like a license to just do whatever you want.
Yeah, and it's not solved by a theology.
Mm,
It's not solved by a methodology. It's not solved by a new drug.
mm,
You know, things like that. It's most of it's a lot of contemplation.
mhm,
It's hard work, healing
mhm.
yourself, and it's learning to be bold enough to have your own ideas and
Yeah.
your own stances, and not to have to win arguments about that all the time, but to know in your heart, what are my
Mhm,
boundaries, what are my goals, what do
mhm,
I really care about, and those kind of things.
mhm.
And then I think that's when you feel the most free, and
I
at
agree.
least that's kind of how it happened for me.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Number 3, fear of isolation.
Humans seem to live in a contradiction. Quantum mechanics shows that the universe is made up of space filled with fields of vibration, interconnected, unified, and in constant communication. With theories like 6 degrees of separation, we propose that everyone in the world is connected through 6 or fewer social connections. Social connections have benefited many, such as how trees interact with fungi through the mycorrhizal network.
But why do most people experience such loneliness, even in a crowded room? Why do we feel separated, even in groups supposed to be like minded? Why are we alone in such a connected universe?
Our fear of isolation leads us away from helpful solitude. When we can clear the distractions and commune with our true selves, we will connect with nature and develop authentic mutual relationships that satisfy our deep need for connection. Brene Brown explained it this way in an interview with Lewis Hose.
I feel I belong everywhere I go. no matter where it is or who I am with, as long as I never betray myself. And the moment I become who you want me to be to fit in and make sure people like me is when I no longer belong anywhere.
Group conformity often debilitates our natural ability to connect. Religious institutions foster faux communities that force us to abandon or betray ourselves to fit into the group. As Brown suggests, when we become what the group insists that we should be, we no longer belong anywhere.
Groups do a great job of introducing people, but unless authenticity is a top priority, they generally suck at genuine connection. People find themselves isolated in church just as often as at home alone. The only reason they don't leave is their fear of the unknown and the existential dread of further isolation. The myth of hell is even propagated in some churches to stoke this fear of separation and keep them from leaving.
We even create groups on social media where we get likes, loves, and cares, which also don't truly fulfill the communal need for connection. Again, it's about authenticity, vulnerability, and belonging. All these things are difficult.
Healthy community stresses, I want the best for you, even if it's not here or even if it's not with our group. If it's unhealthy, we can be alone in the same room with thousands of other people. We have to be able to strengthen bonds with others without losing ourselves.
Healthy language can sound like, for me, or this is how I see it. If we can only celebrate the areas where we think the same, what exactly are we celebrating?
A healthy community stresses time for solitude, and we must become comfortable with solitude long enough to find ourselves. Once we know who we are, we will know what to do and who to connect with. So I think it's safe to admit that probably everyone deals with this fear of isolation.
Mhm.
So you consider yourself an introvert.
Mhm.
I think as I get older, I consider myself more of an introvert as
Mhm.
well. So how do you deal with this fear of isolation from time to time?
Yeah, I say I'm an introvert because I like people, but I don't like being around them.
Mm,
I'm always wanting to go where people are, but then
mhm.
I don't really want to engage.
You have like a set time, like, and then it's like, okay,
Yeah, I
I've
don't
had
need too
my
much of that. I
fill.
don't need
Right.
much of that at all.
Right.
But the thing that happens though, unless we do the important things, then we can still be isolated in a big group. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
extroverts can feel very alone in a crowded room,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So unless we address the issues of that loneliness, and I just want to say that in my deconstruction, one of the greatest things I've done is not learn how to be alone, but learn how to exist in solitude
Mhm.
and actually draw from that and find wisdom in that and
Mhm.
centering yourself while you're in that solitude. It's just like we sometimes tell young people before you get married, be comfortable with
Mm.
being by yourself.
Mhm.
And when you can do that, when you're good with you,
Mm.
right? When you're good with you, then you're like Brene Brown's insinuating there. When you're good with you and you're not trying to be what they want you to be,
Right.
then you're a better community
Mhm.
member, and that connection we're all searching for can be much better,
Right.
right?
And I think a lot of it for me centers around energy. So we know that
Mhm,
extroverts get a lot of their energy from being around other people, and
mhm.
introverts, you know, being around other people, you get a certain amount of energy, but then when you feel like you're having to expel more energy, that's when I feel like, well, I need to just kind of withdraw. But and then I also think about Brene Brown's quote, and if I am having to change who I am for to fit in with a
Mhm.
certain group, then that expels so much of my own energy,
Yeah,
right?
and
And
that fitting in is just
mhm,
faux community.
it
It's
it
not
is.
real. It's
Yeah.
not real connection,
Yeah. I
but
love
it's
that she says, that she belongs to herself first.
Yeah.
So, and I
then
think,
Maya Angelou says, if you belong to yourself, you belong everywhere.
right,
Right. And
right.
that's where Brene and
Yep.
that's where they kind of work together
Yep.
on that
Hmm.
that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
It's
that's
a
really
big one,
important. It's
right?
a big one,
Yeah.
but I think it's really important because, like I was saying about the energy. So, maybe tap into your own energy and what kind of energy
Mm,
can you give to yourself before you give to the world,
yeah.
and where do you want your energy to go?
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
Yeah, it's huge.
Mhm. Number 4, fear of meaninglessness.
Philosophers have long postulated theories of nihilism to assert that the universe contains no universal sense of meaning. Many people who inherited their belief systems eventually conclude that much of what they were indoctrinated with is void of real meaning.
Because meaning is helpful to humans, we create new meanings through our culture, language, and religion. Religion is very good at providing simple, sometimes naive statements of meaning, but they do not allow for the questions that remain. Which is more accurate than all the others? And what about this thing here? Are the questions that keep narcissistic theologians employed. They assert, we will tell you what meaning to extract if you put us on a stage and pay us for the performance.
Meaning and purpose are hard to achieve when aimed at directly. We find them better by living authentically and staying curious. We must remove the exploration obstacles and be aware of packaged solutions. When I worked in the software industry, there were always versions of our products. With other products, there's always a model number. Why? Because we could never account for the possible improvements or mistakes in our own evaluation. We just wanted to be better than the other company and meet the customer's demand. So we gave up on an ultimate solution and just gave it our best. Isn't it fair to say the same things about organized religion and our creeds and our belief systems? Declaring that version 1.0 or even 5.0 in any religion is absolute meaning is naive and misguided. No version is the supreme essence of meaning, especially since they find it hard to agree with each other.
We can find meaning without idolatry, even though it may be frightening to approach nihilism, atheism, or something else we were taught to be afraid of. Unraveling everything may be necessary to find the truth. Otherwise, the meaninglessness we worry about may be the religious practices we thought would save us. We will address these concerns in more detail later. As always, while navigating deep waters, it's appropriate to find seasoned guides to help as long as they let you find meaning from your own experiences instead of forcing you to adopt theirs.
Yeah, so let's look at the action steps for lesson 3.
How have you experienced or are you experiencing the fear of death?
How have you experienced or are you experiencing the fear of freedom?
Have you experienced or are you currently experiencing the fear of isolation?
Have you experienced or are you experiencing the fear of meaninglessness? Take some time to wrestle with those fears and where you are. And we'll see you in lesson 4.